Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members, Prime Minister. Recent developments in Hungary have got many people worried in the EU, but also in the outside world. We share those worries and concerns. Questions have been asked about the compatibility of certain actions of the Hungarian authorities with EU law and with our shared values, and also these questions were raised by your Parliament with the Commission. That is why the College decided to discuss the overall situation in Hungary in two recent meetings, on the 12th of April and today. The discussions allowed us to assess all the issues in an objective, fact-based and law-based manner. We also considered that, given the wider situation, including the spirit of Article 2 of our treaty, a broader political dialogue between Hungarian authorities, other member states, the European Parliament and the Commission should take place. That is why I welcome the debate in the plenary today, which is part of that broader political dialogue with participation of the Hungarian authorities at the highest level. The recently adopted Hungarian higher education law is perceived by many as an attempt to close down the Central European University, which I think is a pearl in the crown of post-divided Europe, of Europe free and whole. The Commission's analysis of the law confirmed our concerns with regard to its compatibility with internal market freedoms and the Charter of Fundamental Rights. The College has therefore decided today to launch infringement proceedings against Hungary by sending a letter of formal notice, and we await a reaction from the Hungarian authorities within a month. The draft legislation tabled to the Hungarian Parliament at the beginning of April on the funding of so-called foreign non-governmental organisations is also on our radar screen. If adopted, it could raise concerns as regards the compatibility with the EU's internal market rules, in particular the free movement of capital and the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, including the freedom of assembly. Civil society is the very fabric of democratic societies. We would not be democracies without strong and free civil societies. I would therefore deeply regret any action by the Hungarian authorities aimed at shrinking the space of civil society organisations, or any attempt to control or stigmatise their work. Yes, NGOs need to be transparent about their finances, but the Commission will continue to follow the draft legislation closely and will express its concerns on the draft law in the context of this broader political dialogue. We also discussed asylum and respect for values of human dignity, freedom, human rights, tolerance and solidarity. The Commission has already expressed its concerns about the existing Hungarian law. The new asylum law adopted at the end of March raises serious doubts about compatibility with EU law. Commissioner Avramopoulos has launched discussions on these issues with the Hungarian authorities. If these discussions do not produce timely results, the Commission will not hesitate to take further action. The protection of pregnant working women is another area we have raised formally with the Hungarian authorities, and as our concerns remain unanswered, the College will shortly decide on the need for further action to ensure full compliance with EU rules on maternity leave and gender equality in employment. Let me here make a more general point. Where the Hungarian authorities engage in a dialogue with the Commission, good progress can be made, and I want to be crystal clear about this. Whenever we ask for a dialogue with the Hungarian authorities, they always oblige and start a dialogue. So I want there be no misunderstanding about this. I want to mention two examples where we have reached good progress. With regard to the transposition of the framework decision on racism and xenophobia, we are pleased to see that in our discussions with the Hungarian authorities, our concerns have been addressed in recently adopted amendments to the Hungarian Criminal Code. However, of course, practical implementation of national legislation is key, and hate crime cases need to be investigated in practice. We will continue to monitor the situation on the ground. As regards the values of equality and non-discrimination, the College continues to be attentive to the situation of the Roma in Hungary, and in particular to the discrimination against Roma children in education. Here we also had a lot of discussion and dialogue, and following our technical discussions with the Hungarian authorities, the Commission is awaiting for Hungary to notify the recently proposed legislative amendments in this field. You will all be aware of the Hungarian government's Stop Brussels consultation. I am pleased to announce that the Commission has decided to make public its own response in order to dispel misunderstandings and perhaps get the facts straight. The European Union is not and has never been about Brussels. The European Union is a project driven and designed by its member states, each of which has decided individually and democratically that this is the path they wish to adopt. This includes Hungary. Each and every one of those member states, including Hungary, take both the responsibility and the credit for decisions we take collectively. Each and every one of those member states, including Hungary, undersigned the rules of the club. Several of the claims and allegations made in the consultation need correction. For instance, and I quote, Brussels wants to force Hungary to abolish the reduction in public utility charges. The reality, however, is that the Commission shares the Hungarian government's objective to have affordable energy for households. The best way to achieve this is to establish competitive energy markets and promote energy efficiency and innovation, and to work together at European level to ensure security of supply. That's at the core of the energy union proposals. Another allegation. Brussels wants to force Hungary to let in illegal immigrants. Again, the reality is that the European Union is fighting irregular migration and is actively helping member states to manage their external borders and return irregular migrants who have no right to stay in the EU. But irregular migration needs to be distinguished from seeking asylum. We have a shared responsibility to live up to our international obligations to protect people fleeing war and persecution and treat them fairly and with dignity. Now, let me be very clear. Hungary in 2015 was under incredible pressure, which was extremely difficult to manage. Given those exceptional pressures in 2015, in September of that year, the Commission proposed to relocate up to 54,000 asylum applicants from Hungary to other member states. But this proposal was opposed by the Hungarian government. Hungary is therefore asked to accept a very limited number of asylum seekers, 1,294. These are not illegal immigrants from the two most overburdened member states, Greece and Italy. Asylum seekers, they can select themselves. They're not shoved down their throats. They can select them themselves. Another allegation. Illegal immigrants heading to Hungary are encouraged to illegal acts by not just human traffickers, but also by some international organizations. Let me be very clear about this. The European Union has zero tolerance for human trafficking and has taken action for many years to combat this heinous crime. Saving lives at sea and looking after vulnerable people who are in need for international protection is not the same thing as promoting irregular migration. There is no evidence whatsoever of NGOs working with criminal smuggling networks to help migrants enter into the EU. A fourth claim. More and more organizations supported from abroad operate in Hungary with the aim to interfere in Hungarian internal matters in a non-transparent manner. I have already indicated the Commission's position earlier. While the conditions under which non-governmental organizations carry out their activities are in principle a matter of national law, those conditions must be in line with EU law and the Union's values. Hence the importance of civil society. The European Union, for its part, had strict rules on transparency and lobbying of the European institutions. The fifth allegation is that Brussels is attacking Hungary's job-creating measures. The opposite is true. The EU is massively supporting job creation in Hungary. The Hungarian authorities themselves have reported that this contributed to creating more than 150,000 jobs. The last issue on the questionnaire is that Brussels is attacking our country because of tax cuts. The fact of the matter is that EU taxation rules must be agreed by all member states unanimously. The EU has agreed only minimum VAT levels. It is the Hungarian government that has decided to set the rate at 27%, which is the highest in the EU. Honourable members, on the 23rd of March, the leaders of 27 member states and EU institutions, including the Prime Minister of Hungary, stated in their Rome Declaration, and I quote, 60 years ago, recovering from the tragedy of two world wars, we decided to bond together and rebuild our continent from its ashes. We have built a unique union with common institutions, strong values, a community of peace, freedom, democracy, human rights and the rule of law. And I have to add to this on a personal note. As a young man, I travelled regularly to Hungary. And I remember very well the sense of oppression I felt crossing the border from Austria at Hege Shalom into Hungary. The barbed wire, the watchtowers, the oppressive feeling in Budapest you had all the time. The single biggest miracle in my lifetime is the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Iron Curtain, and that Hungary became one of the democratic nations of Europe. And that is not something the European Union should claim credit for. This is something that was done by the Hungarian people themselves, striving for freedom. Protecting their freedom, however, is now a common European task, and we will have to fight for that. Given this history, given the Rome Declaration, how can one reconcile this with a campaign to stop Brussels? The fact that only 1 month after this declaration, we are having today's debate on the situation in Hungary gives us all the more reason to seek clarifications about the intentions of the Hungarian government. Let me say that, in conclusion, I strongly thank Parliament for supporting this, but I also want to express my gratitude to Prime Minister Orbán for coming here today and having this debate with us. Dialogue is the European way. Dialogue to solve misunderstandings, but also dialogue when we disagree. That is the European way. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
La parola ora.
And I give the floor to Viktor Orbán, the Hungarian Prime Minister.
Mélyen tisztelt elnök úr, tisztelt
President Tajani, Vice President Timmermans, honorable members. Hungary is once again on the agenda here in the European Parliament. I've come here to Brussels to see you, to take part in this debate. I've been a member of Parliament for almost 30 years now, and I've always been fond of debate, the clashing of opposing views. Democracy is based on reasoned argumentation, and it is also the moral bedrock of the European Union. I'm convinced that we can take better decisions if they come from debate, stem from debate, and not from unilateral statements. My presence here is, I'm here to help you make an informed decision when Hungary is on the agenda. I remember your previous resolutions on Hungary have not stood the test of time and the test of truth. Just think about the Tavares report and its spectacular and embarrassing failure. You should know that we Hungarians never give up the fight. I will rely on the power of reason in today's debate. We have this debate is about is between us and between you and us and financial speculator, an American speculator. We are not as big and powerful as you are, and not as big and powerful as George Soros, the American financial speculator attacking Hungary, who has destroyed the lives of millions of Europeans with his financial speculations, who has been fined for speculation in Hungary, and who is an open enemy of the euro. He is still highly regarded and warmly received here at the highest levels. But this is no reason to condemn us on untruths. Fairness is not a question of the size of the country. Honorable members, I've come here to defend my country. But it's also important to talk about successes. In 2008, we started from the same position as Greece. The government in office was the first one to turn to the IMF and to you, the European Union, for help, for financial help. We have since repaid this loan fully and before its maturity. We have created hundreds of thousands of jobs. Hungary is on the right path to achieving the lowest unemployment in Europe. Today it stands at 4%. We have created work-based society. We have taken people off benefits and back to work. We are aiming at full employment. Budgetary deficit has been well below your threshold for years. The latest figure was 1.8%. Public debt is decreasing, and this year economic growth stands at a stable 4%. We still have a lot of problems to solve, but we have a lot to be proud of. I am convinced that Hungary's successes are also Europe's successes, and the EU needs successes. It would be silly to let our ideological differences divert attention from these successes. Honourable members, there are a number of issues that you seem to be interested in. There are rumors that the Hungarian government has adopted a law and has closed the university, the private university of George Soros, operating in Budapest. The rector of this very university has written to the students and the teachers the following. Let me quote him. We would like to reiterate that the Central European University's existence is not in danger. We will continue to work under any circumstances. So this allegation is unfounded. The situation is really absurd. It's almost like someone being accused of murder, then he's convicted, while the alleged victim is alive and kicking. Moreover, even pointing fingers at the convicted, crying murderer. The truth is that this piece of legislation adopted by the Hungarian Parliament, which is a minor amendment, applies to 28 foreign universities in Hungary, and all it does is introduce uniform rules applying to them, closes loopholes, introduces transparency, and ends privileges that these foreign universities enjoyed over European ones. You are European legislators. I'm the Prime Minister of Hungary, Prime Minister of a member state. It is my job and duty to ensure that European and Hungarian universities enjoy a level playing field and are not at a disadvantage compared to non-EU universities, no matter how big and powerful their owner might be. Honourable members, the other issue on the agenda is the national consultation that we recently introduced. I can tell you that in the last decade it's become something of a habit to regularly ask our citizens to consult them about important issues. We have already held 4 of these. I can full-heartedly recommend the same method to you. This national consultation is about what position the Hungarian government should have on certain issues here in Brussels. We are asking for the support and opinion of people. Honourable members, let me make something clear to you. Hungary and the Hungarian government is committed to the European Union, and this is unquestionable. The last 30 years of Hungarian politics has been based on this. That's why I signed and fully agree with the Rome Declaration, recently adopted, and also the program of the EPP, which we adopted in Malta. However, honorable members, Mr. Vice President, in many aspects we are unhappy with how the European Union works. When we criticize the European Union, it is because we want to correct these mistakes and we want to reform the European Union. It is our conviction that this is the only way to regain people's confidence towards European institutions. We have to do our best to address the root causes of inefficiencies. A good therapy requires a clear diagnosis. We have to be clear about what's wrong. I personally, and we Hungarians generally, we like honest talk. We like to speak clearly so that everybody understands, even if we know that this is not going to be to the liking of everybody. And we are really irritated by the verbal straitjacket which stops us from calling a spade, and this kind of talk has become very common in European public life recently. But we cannot. I don't think we can require all 28 member states to have the same temperament and the same style of debate. That is exactly why I think that European political culture is so exciting. If you manage to overcome your prejudices towards us, you will find a fresh, innovative and creative political thinking behind them. This is also true for the national consultation. This is exactly what lies behind the successes of Hungary. This national consultation questionnaire addresses 3 issues where we disagree with the European Commission. We have a clear position. We don't want, and we don't think it's actually within the founding treaties to make it compulsory to resettle migrants to Hungary. We reserve ourselves the right to decide who we share Hungary with, who we live together with. Another important piece of information is that George Soros and his NGOs want to let in 1 million migrants to the European Union every year. This is his publicly declared program, and he offers financial loans to back this up. You could read this as well. We reject this proposal. We do not want to lose our national competence to set public utility prices, because we're afraid that this would increase the financial burden of the citizens and would lead to a steep increase of prices, which has caused already enough suffering to Hungarian families. Also, we don't want to hand over the national competence of setting taxes to the European Union, because that would make us less competitive. And we don't understand why the Commission in its annual report criticizes the Hungarian public works system, which is a very important basis of a work-based society and not a benefit-based society. These are the hot issues debated here. Our position is that we don't want change in these. We don't want a reshuffle of national and EU competencies in these fields. We want to defend the status quo, the rules that we adopted together. That's where the Stop Brussels slogan comes from. Is this a crime now? We adopted the rules in force together. These are the rules we have in force, and these are the rules that we want to defend. These are common European achievements. This is the acquis. So the Hungarian position cannot be an anti-European position. It is also true, I'm not going to hide this, that our vision of Europe builds on a Europe of strong member states. In such a Europe, the member states shoulder and not fend off responsibility. Responsibility for state debt, public debt, for the budget or the protection of borders. Honourable members, we want to use reason and debate, and we want to use them to shape decision-making here in Brussels. If you don't like our opinion, our position, come forward with reasoned arguments. Let's debate these issues, but don't judge us and condemn us because we have our own opinion. Honourable members, the third issue, regulations and rules on NGOs. The Hungarian bill, draft act, follows a US model. In a number of European countries, and also within the framework of the PIPER report here in the European Parliament, you are dealing with this complex issue. How can we make sure that rich lobbies that want to have an influence on democratic decision-making, how we can introduce transparency in this? The Hungarian bill is based on the principles of transparency. All we want is to know what financial and other interests these NGOs represent. They will still have the constitutional right to voice, to make their voices heard, to represent interests. Honourable members, it is also important to make clear that without exception we have been consistent. We have always said that we want to respect the rules of the club, and we have always done so. I know, I'm fully aware that union membership entails not only rights but also obligations. Whenever we had conflicts in recent years, we tried to debate, we tried open dialogue to come to a solution. We have managed to solve complicated issues such as media law, the new Hungarian constitution, judicial reforms, or the extension of our nuclear power plant. These are cases where we successfully closed the debate. We have come to an agreement. I can reassure you, Mr. Vice President, that we will do so on these issues as well. Honourable members, Hungary is a proud country. We have always been committed to European Christian values. We have always thought that we were an important nation in Europe who want to influence decisions that have an impact on them. Our government in Hungary is working hard to reinforce Hungary's commitment toward the European Union, and we have been successful in this. Public support for the European Union is above 70%, the highest in all member states, and we are proud of this. Believe me when I say this, people will support the European Union, but only if it is based on fair and open debate and is ready to admit that every now and then it needs to be reformed. Mr. President, we have always been respectful towards you. When you are talking about Hungary, I kindly ask you to be critical towards your prejudices, stick to the truth, and measure us by the same yardstick. This is the only way we can be true Europeans worthy of the name. Thank you for listening to me.
La parola.
And I give the floor on behalf of the EPP to Manfred WEBER. President, Vice President, Prime Minister. Today, we're not talking about Soros. Now, there's one thing I don't understand. For 25 years, the Central European University has been giving 2 diplomas in Budapest, an American and the Hungarian. For 25 years, it's done excellent work. It's well-renowned. Hungarian students have an advantage because they can get 2 degrees in Budapest. And I speak on behalf of my whole group, Mr. Prime Minister. We simply do not understand why this advantage is actually being removed from the university. Colleagues, we have a very clear request. The freedom of researchers in the EU has top priority. It has to be defended. Those responsible in the university just want to do their job. They want to teach students. So I'd like to ask Mr. Orbán to take on board the Commission's requests and implement them, please. And the second point, there's a second thing I don't understand, namely that of course you can have a different opinion, you can have different positions in a debate. That's clear. However, the consultation and the questionnaire in Hungary isn't about collecting opinion, but it's about stirring up dissent against Europe. Colleagues, when we talk about the bureaucrats ruling in Brussels, just look around the room and I can see Mr. Orbán. I can see most of the bureaucrats behind you. Everyone else in the House are members, elected politicians who are doing their job. So I want to make it clear that it's not bureaucrats deciding in Brussels, but elected politicians. Ministers and elected politicians decide in Brussels. So we cannot accept that that has been criticised. Kurt Pizza from the Socialists, there are many people who try to stir up dissent against Europe, but we will not tolerate that. And a strong Hungary needs a strong EU and should not try to damage it. And there is one thing that I understand a bit more clearly. If the Hungarian government is putting an initiative on the table and would like to know how the NGOs are financed, who's financing them, then it's not surprising that the Greens here in Brussels are the ones who want to know who's financing the NGOs. They're the ones who want transparency. Now, the question in Hungary, whether you're getting money from Russia, the USA, or elsewhere, I'd also like to know in Europe, I'd like to know who's financing what initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, if we talk about the quality of Mr. Orbán's work in Hungary, we've heard about all the efforts he's made in his country, and that's helping Europe, then Hungary shouldn't be made a scapegoat. Hungary has done excellent work, and conservative policies that are part of our values. We're not going to be told who can be part of our political family. And finally, Mr. Timmermans has said that this is the way we should work in Europe. If there are problems, we get together and we talk to one another. But there's one point I have to pick Mr. Timmermans on. Not every party does this. That is the EPP way. Mr. Orbán has never shunned debate. He's always taken on board what the Commission has asked him. Now, when we discussed Romania and the laws there was no socialist Romanian Prime Minister present here. And I hope that our colleague Mr. Muscat, who's under investigation about Panama and is supposed to be coming here to talk to us, he will be President of the Council. So the Socialists are not always true to what they're calling for. At least we in the EPP talk to one another. Europe isn't about the rights of the strongest, but the strength of the law and rights. We are placing great confidence in Mr. Orbán to listen to the suggestions and to implement them.
Visto il numero degli iscritti a parlare.
Given the large number of members who wish to speak and the fact that this is such a sensitive debate, and I would like to have a catch-the-eye session, I will not be conceding blue cards during the debate. Now, on behalf of the Socialist Democrats, Mr. Pittella.
President, I'd like, first of all, to thank Frans Timmermans for the clear, firm words and for the intention he expressed on behalf of the European Commission. The Commission needs to take this right down the line without excluding any instruments if the conditions are in place. And that includes Article 7 of the treaty. Prime Minister Orbán, you lie whilst knowing you are lying, because you are fully aware that the European Parliament is not defending the interests of a major American financier, but the legitimate expectations of young Hungarian students who do not wish to be deprived of a great, outstanding university. We are not just defending the Central European University, but all universities. We're standing up for science, research, schools, culture, everything that underlies democracy. And it's not just the issue of this university. We have no prejudice regarding you, nor regarding any other figures with different political hues. We are open to dialogue, and we are accustomed to respect shown to our adversaries. We never regard them as enemies. But we are not fooling ourselves. We cannot fail to see what's going on in terms of media pluralism in Hungary. We cannot fail to see what's going on in terms of the work of NGOs. And Prime Minister Orbán, we cannot fail to see that you have failed to trigger a resettlement program for migrants. Not the million requested by Soros, but what the Commission, Council and Parliament have called for. Something like 1,100 people, not much more. People who have fled from war and terrorism, from violence, and have found themselves in Hungary, as if Hungary were a state excluded from the EU. It is. We love the Hungarian people, and when you're in a family, you have to share both the benefits and the burdens and duties of coexistence. And then, of course, there's a political debate here. I would turn to my colleague Mr. Weber, who recalled the links between the EPP group and Prime Minister Orbán. I've heard that the EPP colleagues have said that they are scrupulous about democracy. But Mr. Weber, is it possible to contemplate Orbán remaining still within the group of De Gasperi and of other great figures such as Kohl, who built up European democracy, who always defended democracy, freedom and pluralism? Surely the presence of Orbán should be excluded straight away from the Christian democratic family. And then President Orbán, don't go back to Budapest saying it's all our fault, that we're the bad guys who are imposing certain choices on you, that we are the bad guys who are trying to stop you with regard to the university, NGOs and the media or the refugees. I think you should stand by your conscience and tell your people the truth.
On behalf of the ECR, give the floor to Krasnodębski.
Panie Przewodniczący.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner Timmermans, you were talking about your personal experience from your travels in Hungary, but I would like to remind us all that Hungary, just like my country, Poland, were the pioneers of freedom in the Eastern Bloc, when the countries of the Western Europe were more interested in having pacts with the USSR. And our universities, because we are also talking about universities in Italy and Germany had Marxism in their agenda. So we Poles, we Germans, we Czechs, we Slovaks, we really do not need your preachings when it comes to freedom and democracy. But we would like to share our experience and what we see in your countries as well. And you were also talking about civil societies. Well, yes, civil society is a base of democracy, of functioning of democracy, but this civil society must have its structure. It cannot be a post-colonial or colonial civil society, as it often is in Central Europe. And I think that you would like to maintain this structure. When it comes to Central European University, I personally appreciate it, and I actually had a chance to collaborate with this university for many years. It has achievements in social science, it's introduced interesting elements to the intellectual life of Central Europe. There are important scholars working there, but it also has a very clear ideological profile, which it does not try to hide. And we also know its very controversial founder does not hide his political ambitions, which go as far as even reversing the results of democratic elections in some countries. I would like to remind you that the member states have the right to regulate education, especially the activities of foreign universities. I am convinced that in many countries now criticizing Hungary, the CEU could not be created at all. Because there are no Soros institutions in Germany, in Italy, in France, and it's not pure coincidence. So, I would say that our group is definitely against any attempts to castigate member states without valid reasons. But I also think that maybe we should have a general debate on the state of universities in Europe, because they are not a place of freedom anymore. They are a place of conformity, of repressions against the people who have other ideas. And the best example here is a witch hunt against two well-known professors of a university in Berlin. This is a very well-known example, which somehow is not popular among you. Thank you.
On behalf of ALDE, I'll give the floor to Mr. Verhofstadt.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, Mr. Orbán, I don't know if you remember the first time that we met each other. I'm waiting for the translation now. In that hotel in Budapest, that was in December 1989. Don't remember me the name, but I remember your meeting, because first of all, I had a meeting with SDSZ, the old Liberal Party, and then I asked you, as the leader of Fidesz, why you are not with your mother party here in the meeting room. And you explained why you did it. And it was just a few months, I remember that, before the successful participation of Fidesz in the first free elections of Hungary. By the way, at that moment you were helped by George Soros. I remember that. And that with a program at that time that was more or less a little bit more progressive, I should say, than the program of the SDZ at that moment. I should say more social liberal, a little bit like Emmanuel Macron at that time. So I should say you were the Emmanuel Macron of Hungary in 1989. I don't think that Emmanuel Macron will be pleased with what I have said today. So I didn't say it in French, so I hope that it doesn't make a lot. But let's be honest. A lot changed since 1990 and since 1989 when we saw each other. You changed. You dumped your democratic principles. And in a certain way, you say it openly. I want to create not a liberal democracy, but I want to go to an illiberal state. And the list is long for the moment. What you have done, harassing NGOs, chasing away critical media, building walls, your attempt also, your opinion to reinstate the death penalty in your country, even when it is not possible based on our treaties. And now you have decided to close down a university. And my request to you is, how far will you go? What is the next thing? Burning books or so? On the place before the parliament in Hungary? The so-called Lajos Kossuth Square? Is that the next thing? The books may be of Kertész. The books may be of Conrad. Of maybe the books of what is one of my most favorite writers in Hungary, Sándor Márai, because Sándor Márai also was a Hungarian cosmopolitan that you attack for the moment. And so, when I'm looking to you, you seem proud of it. Fantastic that I can tell it all here. And what I see more and more is not a proud conservative, because in the meanwhile you have become a proud conservative. No, I see a sort of modern-day version of old communist Hungary. Economic protectionism, excessive nationalism, the search of an illiberal state. And you see enemies everywhere of the Hungarian state. You see enemies in the energy sector, you see enemies in the media, you see enemies in the NGOs, you see enemies now also in the academic world. It's like Stalin or Brezhnev or back. But now in Hungary, they had also that kind of paranoia. It's not enough to have a majority in a democracy. You have to chase them. You have to go after them when they have another opinion. So, Mr. Orbán, and I will conclude with that, Hungary became a member of the European Union in 2004. You have signed, and your predecessors, to the values of the Union. And all these principles, you know them very well, and even the left or the right in this House respect them. You have violated, in fact, every single of these principles now, in the different cases that have been mentioned by Mr. Timmermans. And yet what you want to do is to remain member of the European Union. Well, I have in fact more respect for the decency of Eurosceptics, who are at least saying, well, I don't like the European Union, I don't like the values, and I go out. You want to continue the money of the European funds, the money of the European Union, but not the European values. That's not for you. How you call that? Not very courageous, I should say, and certainly not in line with the politician based on principles. And so my question to you is, don't you think that it is time to make a choice again, as you made that choice when you became from a liberal democrat, a little bit a nationalist and a conservative? Is it not the time to ask yourself in your soul how you will to be remembered in the future? Do you want to be remembered as somebody that liberated your country, Hungary, from communism, and that you did? Or want you to be commemorated as an eternal enemy of our open European democratic society? That's the choice that you have to make now.
On behalf of the GUI NGL, I give the floor to Mrs. Zimmer.
Werter Herr Präsident.
President, people in political life, in different political times, change their position as they develop and open up further. That's normal. In European history, I don't think there are any outstanding personalities who have not been through a process of development, such as George Lukács, someone whom I greatly respect, and for me stands out for the Hungary that you spoke about, a Hungary of democracy, freedom, openness and change in terms of people's lives. You talked about the Hungarian successes that you were so proud of. What is the Hungarian people? People live in Hungary, different people, ethnic groups, migrants, ethnic groups including Roma. All these people living in your country, working in your country, do they all have the same rights? Are they esteemed equally? Are they all not discriminated against? That's what I would like to ask you first. You talk about Soros. I'm no friend of Soros. I come from the left. I don't have to justify that. But I'm surprised that you take him on in that way. Did you not yourself get a grant from Soros to attend Oxford? This approach you're taking therefore surprises me, if it's correct, that this university law that has been adopted is in fact a Lex CEU directed solely against that university. And if the conditions are only applicable to that university, then you have to ask, what's going on? Is this really scientific freedom? Is this freedom of access to research and study? and science, or is this simply about cheap politics, which is something that people working in education and science will have to carry the can for, wondering whether they'll have to leave? We had the rector of the university here in Parliament, and obviously he doesn't agree with what you're saying, and perhaps he's conscious of the effects that this law will have on people. 80,000 people have taken to the streets. It's your citizens, not us, who were protesting on the streets in Hungary, saying that we are losing something here. What it's about is that this university is something that should remain part of academic life. That's why we are appealing to you to ensure that rights are respected. Look again at the NGO bill. It's not consistent with international law and a number of other things. Look at the situation with regard to asylum applicants in Hungary. It's not just about the laws you adopt nationally, there are also international conventions which must be complied with. You are just as duty-bound to do that as you are to live by the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. Thank you.
On behalf of the Greens, I give the floor to Mr. Lamberts.
Mr. Prime Minister, welcome in the European Parliament. I really appreciate your presence, and indeed, as Manfred said, it's better to debate directly. Mr. Orbán, I must say I no longer recognize, we were born in the same year actually, and I no longer recognize the defender of freedom and democracy that became known to me under your name back in 1989. While we Greens, you know, we also have our shares of criticism for a number of political orientations of the European Union. But what I don't understand is when you start comparing the EU with the Soviet Union. Come on, if Brussels were Moscow, we would have tanks from the EU in London right now. We don't. We don't. On the contrary, I am struck by the fact that a number of the laws that you are passing in your country find their inspiration in Putin's Moscow, which is hardly anyone's dream, right? No, I really don't understand you, because you have a privilege. You enjoyed twice an overwhelming majority. Your people trusted you. And I just imagine, you might laugh at me, but if my party would enjoy a two-thirds majority in any member state, well, 3 times, okay, I agree. Well, I would not be afraid of an independent press, because it would stimulate the public debate in the country and mobilize the collective intelligence that we need. I would not be afraid of a strong and independent judiciary, because checks and balances is what we need in democracy. I would not be afraid of a vibrant civil society, because it would help me spotting problem areas that I need to solve. I would not be afraid of leading-edge universities, because they would nurture talent in my country. And I would say, even better if some of the funding comes from abroad, because it enriches my country. It's not just that I wouldn't be afraid of these things. I would cherish them, because I think they would help me delivering a better society for my citizens. So really, what are you afraid of? I might tell you, a bit like Guy Verhofstadt said, that, well, since Hungary enjoys the financial solidarity of the EU, and rightfully so, it should abide by all the obligations of the EU. Yes, but this is not the first reason. The first reason is, well, do these things, be an open society, because it's good for Hungary. Hungary will be stronger. Hungary will be a better place for its people by having a diversified free press, strong democratic checks and balances, a vibrant civil society, and leading-edge universities. I'd like to conclude with one thing, the refugee issue, and of course you expected me to do that. Mr. Orbán, I must say that we are utterly appalled at the way your country has been treating refugees. True enough, Hungary sits in an uncomfortable situation at the outer border of the EU. But instead of directing your anger at refugees themselves, you should direct your energy towards your fellow EU member states so that help you welcoming them. Mr. Orbán, and you did it again today, you often refer to the Christian values. Well, I must tell you one thing. As a Christian, I find nowhere in the gospel that the stranger should be locked up and sent back. What I read there is that we should welcome and protect. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the EFDD, I give the floor to Mr. Farage.
Well, Mr. Orbán, not for the first time, you sit here as the democratically elected leader of a great nation, and you stand up and make a reasoned argument as to how the Hungarians do things and how actually there are different cultures within Europe. And you're prepared again and again to come back here and to be attacked and abused by non-entities who want Hungary to bow to their will and not to the will of the Hungarian people or its leader. And I'm beginning to wonder, at what point, sir, do you, as an intelligent man, stop banging your head up against a wall? You spoke today and you behaved today as the leader of a nation. But isn't it becoming obvious that as a member of the European Union, actually you are not a nation? Just as we're seeing in France at the moment, with huge interference in the French presidential election, even with the unelected commission now coming out and backing this godlike creature called Macron. No, you're not the leader of a nation. And these people will go on interfering in the lives of Hungarian people. And you'll never be forgiven. You are a sinner in their eyes, not just because you want to close down George Soros's propaganda machine that masquerades as a university. Nothing to do with that. It's because you won't pay the price for Mrs. Merkel's supreme folly and sign up to migrant quotas, and they will never, ever forgive you for it. Surely, when you yourself have said in the past, we need to get rid of a utopia called supranational Europe, it must become clear to you, as it became clear to Eurosceptics in the United Kingdom, this set of organisations bound by their treaties are not open to reform. Institutions like this are led by fanatics. They are turning this into a state, and the nation state cannot coexist alongside. Now, you were bold enough to call a referendum on the migrant quotas, and 88% of those that voted agreed with you. Surely logic says it's time you gave the Hungarian people a referendum on whether they stayed part of the European Union or not. Who knows? You might come and join the Brexit club. And then we could fight, for a nation of democratic states working together, trading together, and put this nonsense behind us.
On behalf of the ENF, I give the floor to Mrs. Salvini. Thank you, President. Now, it seems to me that 500 million Europeans are governed by puppets and bureaucrats. Now, whilst terrorists are shedding blood in Europe, what we're worrying about now is taking Hungary to court. Mr. Orbán, stand tight. They're worrying about the Roma, the supposed fictitious refugees, the billions of Soros and the government. Now, the Hungarians have a single flat rates tax of 16%. In Hungary, corporations pay 9%. Unemployment has fallen to 4%. Youth employment, 11%. Retirement at the age of 62. The Hungarian people and government have been strong enough to defend and protect their own currency, their central bank, their borders. What are we doing? Are we going to send in the tanks like in 1956? Are we going to use sanctions then instead of missiles? I remember that some Europeans of today that are in favour of the EU and Macron, Giorgio Napolitano, for example, former president of Italy, when the Soviet tanks invaded Hungary, proud like today, they talked about Hungarians as fascists, and they called on the tanks to come in to safeguard peace in the world. But it seems nothing's changed in those 6 years. Instead of the tanks, you're using the banks, finance, and an invasion of immigrants, so-called fake refugees, and then unscrupulous financiers like Soros, maybe financing some of the people here in this parliament or in this commission. So instead of taking Poland and Hungary to court, try to think about the 20 million unemployed Europeans and protect our borders, Commissioner. You, a member of the party of the same group who said that Southern Europeans spend money on alcohol and women, and I think you should be ashamed of yourselves. You should respect the Prime Minister has been voted on by the Hungarians. You should stop getting involved on behalf of Macron, leave the French to vote for themselves. Now, on behalf of the Italians, thank you very much for what you're doing. Thank you for what you've done and what you will do. Thank you for resisting the Soviet EU diktats. Long live Hungary.
All'onorevole Balczó.
Now I give the floor to Balczó.
President, thank you. Jobbik, as a member Jobbik in the European Parliament in the debate on the government of Hungary, my position is always determined by the actual case. Therefore, I was against, for instance, the quota of migrants, and I was in protection of the Hungarian government policy. Like I did in 2015, I was the only party back then to do this. Jobbik is against Mr. Soros. We are against the ideology of open society. Nevertheless, to pull the plug on the CEU is done by the government by an authoritarian decision, which is an unacceptable precedent. We cannot accept it. We do not await a solution from the EU, but rather from the Hungarian Constitutional Court. Therefore, in Hungary, in the Hungarian Parliament, Jobbik Party proposed a decision by the Constitutional Court. The real solution will be brought about in next year's parliamentary elections in Hungary. We're against this corrupt regime of this government.
Given the importance of the debate, I've been quite flexible about the timing allocated to the group leaders to allow them to express their positions. But now, with the remaining speakers in the debate, given that we're also going to have a catch the eye, can I ask you please to stick to time allocated to you? First of all, Mrs. de Lange, 1 minute.
Yes, and I understand you start being strict with me, so I will try very hard. But I stand here with pain in my heart in this debate. Pain in my heart because I also know the other Hungary and the other Fidesz, I have to say. The Fidesz that was born in opposition to communism, and the Fidesz that participated in the pan-European picnics, showing that it wanted to overcome communism and become part of a Europe that stands united. Yet we need this debate here in this room today, because not for the first time, and yet again, developments in Hungary seem to run counter to our values and to what we stand for. Everything we fought for in 1989. Freedom of education, non-discrimination, the principle of sincere cooperation. And it's a good thing, I say to Frans Timmermans, that the Commission is working on this. But the real question, of course, lies with you, Mr. Prime Minister. Are you really the kind of man that needs to paint an incorrect and exaggerated picture of Brussels as the enemy, only to look stronger at home? Is your place among the autocratic leaders we see in our neighborhood, like Putin or Erdogan, or do you belong to a Europe based on the core values that you yourself fought for in '89? The choice is yours, but so are the consequences. Thank you very much.
Well, I was flexible with you too.
Thank you. Dear Prime Minister, I'm from your neighboring country, Slovenia, and I have many friends in Hungary. We together dreamed to be part of an open Europe, and today I share my deep worries with them. The current government's campaign against the NGOs is unacceptable. We cannot just sweep out the civil society. In current national consultation, Let's Stop Brussels, the name tells it all, you portray NGOs as a threat to the national interests. With hundreds of NGOs across Europe, we urge you to withdraw the proposed bill, and we urge you to respect the academic freedom and autonomy and suspend the discriminatory changes to the higher education legislation. I ask also my EPP colleagues to understand it's high time the Commission formally triggers its rule of law framework with Hungary. We have to defend the people of Hungary from the corrosion of the fundamental values. And Mr. Orbán, I'm very sensitive to European migration policy. Do not imprison people fleeing for their lives to Europe in container villages behind razor blades. It's a shame for Europe. Thank you.
Mrs. MACOVEI.
Thank you. Yes, as President Manfred Weber said, this debate is not about George Soros. It's about what happened in Hungary and what you do, Mr. Orbán. However, I will also recall that in 89-90 you benefited from a Soros scholarship at a college in Oxford, and you studied liberal political philosophy. Now let's come back to the present time. Academic freedom is cancelled in Hungary, and we ask it back. Your attack against EU and other foreign universities, against civil society, is a brutal attack against free-minded education and free-minded people. We cannot tolerate this in the European Union. A month ago, Putin forced the closure of the European University in St. Petersburg. Shortly after, you did the same inside the European Union. I do not believe this is a coincidence. I believe it is a coordinated plan against free-minded and democracy. So, Prime Minister Orbán, come back to values and to Europe.
Thank you, Chair. I would actually like to use my minute not to debate with Mr. Orbán, who's probably not going to be convinced anyway. He once said that his big examples were Putin and Erdogan, and indeed he's a very good copy of that. However, I would like to address the European Commission. I very much welcome the steps that have been taken by Mr. Timmermans. I also recognise the limited instruments available, but I think we should all recognise, and I would also like to ask Mr. Weber to recognise that, we are not talking about single issues here. We should address this in the systematic nature of the problem, the systematic destruction of the democratic rule of law and fundamental rights. We should also recognise the contagion that is taking place to Poland. So if we fail to recognise that systematic nature, then we fail to preserve the integrity of the European Union. And therefore, I think it is high time that we launch the Article 7.1 procedure, and I hope that this House is going to vote for it. Thank you.
Onorevole Vergiat.
Mrs. Vergiat.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Democracy, which is illiberal, that's the new Hungarian model. And that's what we've seen progressively and systematically bringing down of other forms of power, media, justice, education and NGOs. And the Stop Brussels consultations is a mark of that as well. And the law on the NGOs. Yes, it's on the base of Russian law, but it's not about transparency, it's about suspicion. When it comes to immigration, you wonder if asylum rights actually exist in Hungary. The Geneva Convention is no longer respected. There are systematic detentions, including of minors. There's a building of a wall at the border with Serbia, which is now going to be electrified. And there are also snipers on the border. And then there are all kinds of whipping boys being used as well. There's an absence of action from the part of the European Commission since 2015, and Mr. Avramopoulos has been silent on this as well. Now, Mr. Timmermans, finally the Commission has decided to open infringement proceedings against the Hungarians, and that should be put to the vote at the next Hungary plenary part session. We cannot play these games, Mr. Orbán, particularly in a country with a history like Hungary's.
Onorevole Sargentini.
Mrs. Sargentini.
Dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Prime Minister, the newspapers have been silenced, the refugees have been locked up, and your regime really needs enemies to stay in power. That's true for scientists, students, political activists and Europeans. And it reminds me of the poem from the Second World War when they arrested the communists. I was silenced because I wasn't a communist. But, Mr. Timmermans, and I'm speaking to you now, we can't expect Mr. Orbán to suddenly improve his democracy track record. No, we have to make sure that the Commission acts now, and Article 2 proceedings have to begin, yes, in Council, but you can begin with Article 7 now without getting a mandate from the Council, so please go ahead and do that.
Ja, sehr geehrter Präsident.
President, Prime Minister Orbán, supposedly today we are discussing your new university law in Hungary, but we all know that's not what it's about. It's about Hungarian defiance, the Hungarian way. Hungary is opposing Brussels centralism and wishes to preserve its national independence. Hungary is opposing Muslim mass migration and wishes to maintain its Christian Western culture. Hungary is opposing the left-leaning zeitgeist and wants just to remain Hungary. Since the 13th of November 2015, France has been in a state of emergency. Stockholm is now the world capital of rape. Now, if I had to decide between the French, Swedish and Hungarian way, then I would choose the Hungarian way. Please stand firm, Mr. Orbán, you are a rock in the storm.
Ms. Morvai.
Ho detto che non concedo...
I said that I'm... What is the point of order? Or what is the item on the agenda?
Facts when she accuses Sweden and Stockholm in a way to be the capital of rape in this house.
This is a debate.
Please, this is an insult.
It's a free debate.
La parola all'onorevole Morvai.
I give the floor to Mrs. Morvai.
Dear colleagues, we Hungarians are well known for being the lovers of freedom. We always seek autonomy in the history. If we hear, even if we hear the word liberty, our hearts start to beat. So we can be mobilized for matters like freedom of education, freedom of research, or freedom of speech, freedom of the media. That can mobilize us very well. But it's a vicious thing that you barter a massive migration under the masquerade of freedom. We don't want migrants. We reject them. You should understand that. And also Hungarians should pay attention to this outrageous scheme that you couple freedom to the migrant issue. Migrants you call asylum seekers. So you try to force Hungary to accept migrants. And we should pay attention that many people in Hungary demonstrate for civil liberties, freedom of education. Of course, we accept that, but immediately there is another poster, pull down the fences. That is how you couple one thing to the other, and that's an outrageous scheme. We want freedom, dignity, human rights, yes, but en masse migration, no.
Onorevole Metsola.
Mrs. Metsola.
Thank you. Member state representatives come here to stand up for their policies. That is their prerogative. But mine is to stand up for the Europe I believe in. European Union is not a pick-and-choose entity. It is a collection of states that share the same intrinsic value system and that believe in sincere cooperation with each other. When higher education institutes are targeted and vast sums are spent on disingenuous campaigns to stop Brussels, this runs contrary to the values we believe in. Pandering to populists at the very time when the world needs the opposite is not our way. I am a proud member of the EPP. We believe in a Europe of freedom of thinking, of freedom of speech, and we will always defend those values whenever and wherever they are under threat, whether it is corruption in Malta by the socialist government, the watering down of the rule of law in Romania, institutions under pressure in Poland, or what is happening in Hungary. This is what we stand for. Our values have stood the test of time, and they are not up for negotiation, not now and not ever.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Niedermüller.
Thank you. To some extent, I sympathize with you. It must be difficult to live a life like yours, always in anxiety, always looking for enemies. You're afraid of democracy, from open society, from debates, from the European Union, from migrants, from NGOs, independent media, from free education. You're afraid of every single item on which Europe has been built after World War II. And you're not only systematically undermining liberties, but you betray the fundamental interests of the Hungarian society. You want to turn Hungary into a second Russia. But the people in Budapest streets under European flags do not want that. You want to stop Brussels, although you should be stopped, because your illiberal democracy is based on enemies, lies, corruption, and embezzlement of public funds. But by now, you and your politics has been got into a blind alley. Even your fellow party members do not support you, and we will never leave Hungary to walk alone.
Mr. Jávor, 1 minute.
Tisztelt Timmermans úr és
Vice President Timmermans, Mr. Manfred WEBER. We are talking about Hungary. Not for the first time, and I'm afraid not for the last time. Lex TEU, the NGO bill, the Stop Brussels campaign. Viktor Orbán has crossed another line. Again, not the first line he has crossed in recent years. The Commission hasn't been doing much, and the EPP has been defending him. Maybe you thought that active protests from the Commission would only make things worse, and it's better if the EPP keeps Orbán under check within the party. You know, you are not right, but you have the responsibility. Your passivity has only been oil to the fire, and the EPP's protection has legitimized all that he's done, all that he's doing. You have betrayed all those Europeans who believe in a Europe which is more than just a common market. It's a union of values and rights and principles. It's time to prove that you are behind and beside these people.
Madame BOCSKOR, 1 minute.
Tisztelt kollégák, tisztelt...
Dear colleagues, dear members, before I became an MEP, I was a high school professor in the Ukraine, in an institution which was always to be closed down, but it was never on the headlines or a cover page of the New York Times. So therefore I understand that the CEU outrage is not about academic freedom, but it is a matter of double standards. When the minority education is at stake, why don't you raise your voice then in other countries? The amendment of the Hungarian higher education law is not aiming at closing down the CEU, but to render the regime more transparent. And every country has the right to do this. The incorrections found by the education ministry was only rejected by the CEU, not by other universities. Why can't we have an objective debate on the matter with the CEU? You shouldn't be one-sided and prejudiced. You should listen to both parties when making decisions.
Madame Costa, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Vice President Timmermans. With the 60th anniversary of the treaties and the 30th of Erasmus, it's a significant time. And finally, our request has been taken on board by the Commission to take a first step to engage infringement procedures against Hungary, having violated Article 2 of the treaty, as well as 13 and 14 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. After the petition signed by thousands of Hungarian and international academics and others, yesterday we met with a colleague who confirmed that the law is undermining the existence of the CEU. It's the director who came to speak to us yesterday, Michael Ignatieff. This law is going to put such constraints as to block the activities of the CEU and no longer make it possible for students to sign up. This is yet another violation of human rights, as with asylum seekers, the wall, the curbs on the media, constraints on the NGOs, and the unacceptable Stop Brussels campaign. I do hope that our principles will be respected.
Prime Minister, thank you for being here, and also thank you for writing to me recently. A couple of years ago, we started off with a constitution. media freedom, retirement age for judges. We've witnessed several unspeakably worded national consultations in the meantime. We've witnessed a vague idea to reintroduce the death penalty, and all that coming from a man who is constantly referring to Christian values. It escapes me, Prime Minister, where the death penalty would be on any Christian agenda. And I've rarely found any Christian theologian who would have been able to find anything good about the death penalty. And now it's about a university, it's about NGOs, it's above all about the next national consultation. The NGO thing, Prime Minister, is not about transparency, as we all know. It is in order to label NGOs that are foreign funded as foreign, because they might carry foreign influence into Hungary, and foreign influence is bad. Now, the only thing that comes to mind to me in all this context is, if all foreign influence is so bad, why do you accept the payment of 5 billion euros annually as the big net recipient of European structural funds in order to plaster the whole country with the posters in which you call Brussels crap? Somebody who does that, Prime Minister, leaves the Union out of their own accord.
And now, Mr. UJHELYI, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, European Democrats on one side and Mr. Orbán, Prime Minister Orbán, on the other side. A betrayal, shame. This is the same person who in '89 received the Soros Scholarship. The same '89 Viktor Orbán would be ashamed of today's Viktor Orbán, who has betrayed democracy, the values, the principles that you represented back in the day. But what's even worse, how shameful to all of us Hungarians that once again we stand here, Hungary on the agenda. This is treason. Whatever you say, whatever the press you finance says, this is treason. 28 years ago, you took part in overthrowing the Stalinist party, and now you're building a new Putin-type nationalistic state. What has happened in the meantime? We don't know. One thing is for sure, we have to do something about it. We have to act against this. Dear members, please do look at the rule of law in Hungary, but don't punish us just yet, because punishment is required not for the Hungarian people, but Mr. Orbán. We will get rid of him and bring Hungary back to Europe and European values.
1 minute, Mr. SOGOR.
Because we're talking about university, the CEU, and that's one of the occasions why Hungary is discussed now. I'd like to call the attention to Romania, that there is a very important higher education institution in Târgu Mureș. There is a medical university, which according to the 2011 education law in Romania is a multicultural university. So there should be an independent Hungarian department within the university, but it has never taken place in the last 6 years. But no one is worried about this in the Romanian government, nor in the Council of Europe, or in the EU. I raised my voice several times in that matter, but this particular university and this particular country is not so interesting as the CEU and Hungary. I think European institutions should be more consequent in demanding the rule of law in every member state.
Mrs. Gál, 1 minute, please.
Today's attacks against our Prime Minister and Hungary is clearly due to our position on migration. We have been saying the same thing for 2 years. We were the first and only one in Europe. And the same position is now present in EPP documents. Just look at the documents approved in Malta. We can only guarantee the security of European citizens if we protect the external borders of Europe, and if we decide who we let in and how many of them we allow in. We really have to make a distinction between economic migrants and real refugees, and we have to tackle the root causes of migration, and we have to help them stay where they are. These are the clear positions of Hungary that put us on the agenda again. But Hungarian citizens and the Prime Minister only want what every European wants, to live in a secure and prosperous Europe. This is our responsibility and duty to ensure that people feel safe here in Europe. It is sad and shameful that people like Verhofstadt preach to us, and people even clap their hands when they hear these words.
Thank you, colleagues. We now move to Catch the Eye, and I will take 5, which is what I'm required to do, but there are lots of colleagues who will be very disappointed, and I regret that that is the case. So our first speaker for 1 minute, Madam ŠOJDROVÁ.
Paní místopředsedkyně za
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Prime Minister Orbán, I would like to ask you a question. You recommend us to consult our citizens more often. Have you consulted the modification of the law on universities with your citizens? Because what you propose is disastrous for them. Hungary can make a choice, of course. It can choose the conditions of working of their universities. But you know that 6 new legislative conditions, among other things, an agreement between Hungary and the US, this is nothing that you can do in 6 months. So if you want to improve conditions in education, if you want to introduce higher transparency, I agree with that. This is your right. But then please give all universities the possibility to meet those conditions. This is my request for you. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. López Aguilar.
Prime
Minister Orbán, if Hungary has been scrutinized by this parliament once again, it's not because your country is a victim of the imaginary tanks of the Soviet or the EU. It's because this parliament represents the European Union, which is the parliament that accepted your country when it acceded to the EU and signed the Lisbon Treaty and agreed to the principles of freedom of information and other important principles. Now there have been restrictions on people's rights, including those of foreigners and immigrants. Now, Article 7, Commissioner, this is about action to defend principles, and we have to do this without fear, because we have a vote in this House, and we've got to do something about the aggression of the Hungarian government.
Na początku tej kadencji parlamentu
At the beginning of our term, also during a debate concerning Hungary, the Vice President of the Liberals said that it is not really about that law or other law, but it's about the direction in which the Hungary goes. And she said then, and I remember that very well, that she hopes that when it comes to Hungary, and then it turned out also against other countries, the Commission will be more bold and less legalistic. This is the definition of the rule of law. So be bold and be less legal when it comes to the countries, the political attitudes of which you do not like. So here we have this Commission of Mr. Juncker and Mr. Timmermans. Yes, the freedom is being threatened more and more, but the freedom will prevail in Europe thanks to such countries as Hungary and Poland, thanks to such politicians as Mr. Orbán. Congratulations.
Mrs. Lunacek.
Danke, Herr Präsident. Herr Premierminister.
President, Prime Minister Orbán, you're here for the 3rd time now to join in dialogue with us, I admit. Now, it seems this 3rd time you want no dialogue. You don't really want to listen to us. You're just coming to us to tell us that we, the EU, are your enemy and opponent, and you want to stop us. But only someone who feels weak and anxious would do that. And the laws that you have adopted in Hungary, trying to scrap pretty much the CEU, or the NGO legislation, only someone scared of democracy and free universities or scared of civil society would do that. Only someone scared of criticism, to cut a long story short. Someone scared of democracy. Mr. Orbán, I think you need to be stopped. That's a message from me to the Commission, to you, Vice President Timmermans. Finally, start up Article 7 and give the Council the alternative of either being clear or taking action. Now, the only ones applauding aren't your party, but the right-wing extremists. Not even the EPP are applauding anymore. I think it's time that we excluded Orbán and Fidesz. Mr.
Thank you, Chair. The hypocrisy in this room is overwhelming. Most heads of political groups try to tell peoples and nations and governments what to do. Someone should explain to the Hungarian citizens why we're discussing fundamental rights in Hungary, why we are talking against their elected government. This University of Central Europe is funded, as well as many NGOs, by George Soros, who intervenes in the internal affairs of many states through these bodies. It is a right of all governments to protect their national interests and their citizens. And the European Union cannot stop them. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Orbán because he judges according to the interests of his people. He's against the Islamization for their national identity and defends Hungary from the attempts of non-institutional actors to impose globalization. Thank you.
Si conclude così il Catch the Eye.
That concludes Catch the Eye. And Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, you now have the floor to answer the questions put to you by Parliament.
Köszönöm, elnök úr. Azt hiszem úgy illendő, hogy néhány fontos kérdésre válaszoljak. Először is köszönöm mindannyiuknak ezt a vitát. Köszönöm, hogy figyelnek Magyarországra.
I thank you for paying attention to Hungary and for telling me your opinions. And also for those who supported our decisions. I specifically thank for those members of parliament who expressed their solidarity with Hungary. There were some Hungarian speakers. I do not want to assess the fact that some Hungarians are attacking their home country here in Brussels. I think we should have these views back home. To Mr. Verhofstadt, I have to say that it is my impression as though you would tell us Hungarians what we should do. I think you should entrust Hungarian voters to make decisions. They do so every 4 years. To Mr. Timmermans, I'd like to thank for his speech, and I thank you for offering us an open dialogue. We are ready to engage into a debate on every particular issue, and I think some of these issues will be easily resolved. I also have to respond to Mr. Pittella because I think he used a rather shrill tone when addressing me. Let me correct one of your ideas. Migrants do not want to go to Hungary. Migrants want to transit Hungary towards Austria, Germany and Sweden instead. What we do is we protect Austria, Germany and Sweden. We are observing the Schengen Treaty, and it's somewhat awkward that you as a member of European Parliament are slandering Hungary because we observe the Schengen Treaty, not primarily for our own sake, but for the sake of the Germans, Austrians and Swedes. I think we should be rewarded for this rather than being defamed. The talks which try to instigate, try to turn the EPP against my party and myself, this is an old communist tactics. You want to slice up the EPP like a salami, as we say it in Hungary, so that you will become stronger. This is what happened in Hungary in the communist rule, and I would propose to the EPP not to accept this approach and these tactics. Our position in the migrant issue is totally clear. We have to stop illegal migration. The distinction between asylum seekers and migrants should be performed outside of the territory of the European Union, and people in trouble should be helped in the location where they are instead of bringing them into the EU. Who is not performing readmission and resettlement? Mr. Pittella, less than 10% has been resettled. It is not only Hungary which has not been participating. We only talk about 1,000 people in the Hungarian case. It is evident that the compulsory quota policy has failed. It is useless to push it further, because even countries which do not raise their voice against it like we do not implement it. If a policy has failed, you have to stop it and have to look for another solution. Let me talk about funds and finances. The money received by Hungary from the EU is not a gift. Cohesion policy is good for everyone. Every member state of the European Union benefits from the cohesion policy. Those who provide the funds are also get incomes from this. Net payers are also beneficiaries of the cohesion policy. Commissioners are openly talk about this. There are figures about this. What percentage of the funds are returned or reimbursed to the net payers? And I think it's right. We opened our markets, we dismantled our customs, and we opened our markets to capital. After the communism, we were poor as beggars. Nevertheless, we did so. I think without cohesion policy, there is no fair competition. You cannot request us, the members of parliament, to shut up, and you cannot address us as though we were being given handouts and we would be kind of on your bankroll and should behave accordingly. We cannot accept this. We have to reject such proposals. That Hungary would be an authoritarian political regime due to my personality, although we're not talking about myself but 10 million Hungarians. Let me inform you that I spent 16 years in opposition in the Hungarian parliament, and I only started my 12th year in government. And I'm one of the few European leaders who, when lost elections, did not go back to a board of trustees or back to business and do not tour the world giving lectures in universities, but we stayed in politics even when we lost elections, and we stood up for a fight as in opposition, and we got back government. So if you allege us being authoritarian with such a track record, I think is not truthful, it's not fair. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a lot of ideas about Mr. Soros, but I don't think he has been given a stipend to anyone because he thought that by this you would buy the person's opinion for a lifetime. He never did so, and I have to reject this allegation. And you mentioned illiberal democracy. Well, as a matter of fact, in Central Europe, people believe if liberals do not win an elections, or not part of government, then there is no democracy. Well, we are fed up of this idea. Even if liberals lose elections, you still continue to have democracy in place. And liberal democracy is the one where not the liberals are in government.
Visto che il dibattito è aperto tra la Commissione e il Governo.
Given that the debate is open between the Hungarian government and the Commission, I give the floor to Vice President of the Commission, Timmermans.
At the conclusion of this debate, let me draw a few conclusions for the Commission. I will be looking forward to the reply by the Hungarian authorities to the notification we have sent on the law on higher education. In our view, this law is clearly in violation of EU law, so I hope we can get a response to that. And I have to say that the only thing the Central European University is asking is to be left alone, to do what it does well. And I come from a country where, in centuries, Hungarian scholars came to study and to enrich also my country. We live in a European Union where, through the Erasmus programme, cross-fertilisation of young minds across the European Union is one of the biggest assets of this European Union, one of the biggest success stories. And I think we should cherish this academic freedom, this exchange of ideas, this way of promoting a vision of the world that is open to other views. And about other views, I fully respect different visions and opinions about the future of the European Union. Everybody's entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. And I know we live in a time that very often when we have strong opinion and they're not in line with the facts, we assume that the facts must be wrong. But on this specific case, the Commission will stick to the facts. And I would be grateful to the Hungarian authorities if, in their procedure on Stop Brussels, they would take into account the facts we have presented in reaction to the questions put to the Hungarian population. I think we deserve that. That is how we work in the European Union. I would look forward in continuing working with Hungary on this. And about this debate, we are not going to solve these issues only by taking legal steps. The Commission will take legal steps when legal steps are warranted, when the treaties are violated. But we will only reach a consensus, or we will only reach an idea of where we need collectively where we need to go collectively in the European Union if we have a debate. And if you allow me, Mr. President, I want to make one remark. From the extreme right, because of the lack of arguments, we only get insults. And because nobody reacted, I want to react. I was deeply, deeply aggravated by the vile attack by Ms. von Storch on Stockholm and on Sweden. I think this is completely unacceptable. This is not the way we should have a debate about our common future. I think we can ask of each other to disagree profoundly, but to have respect for each other. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
The debate is closed. The vote May 1.